welcome back to the Press On podcast. My name is Mike Woodruff, and we are trying to help you navigate crazy cultural times with timeless biblical truth. Or, as I said last time, something like that. We have now said that in January, we will roll out something that's polished and we'll have the name down and the tagline and all that stuff. But I'm not going to worry about that. I'm excited that today I have a chance to talk with Bob Merritt. And Bob is the recently retired senior pastor at Eagle Brook Church up in Minnesota. It's a multi-site church that under his tenure grew, under his multi-decade tenure, grew from a few hundred people to well over 20,000 people. Bob did his undergraduate and master's degrees at Bethel University, did a PhD in speech communications at Penn State. I have known of Bob for 10 years or so, hearing about Eagle Brook and hearing about his teaching and about their sort of zealous focus on reaching out and seeing people come to faith. And then just a couple of weeks ago, Bob and I were together in Pennsylvania at a small gathering. Bob was one of three pastors who had recently retired or were about to retire, who were talking to 8 of us who were in somewhere between the ages of 55 and 65, who had gathered together to say, at some point in the next 10 years, we're going to step out of the lead chair and we ought to think about that. So I think one of the 8 that was there was basically ready to say, as soon as I can get out of this chair, I will do it. The rest of us were all saying, wow, I just don't see that day. I got energy. I'm excited. I'm moving as fast as I can, dreaming dreams and wanting to see more things happen. I'm definitely in that camp, but did get together, was persuaded that it was wise to think about how all this might unfold over the course of the next 5 or 10 years. So Bob and I were together, and he had helpful things to share. And I discovered at that point his book, which I have right here, done with that, Escape the Struggle of Your Old Life. And we talked about that. We actually rode to the airport together as we were leaving and had a chance to talk about that. And I said, would you humor me and come on this podcast? We can talk about this topic. So Bob has been an adjunct professor at Bethel. He is a dad. He is an outdoorsman, big hunter and fisher. And he has a dog named Blue that he writes about and talks about at great length. So, Bob, welcome. Thank you for being on the podcast.
Mike, thanks for having me. It's an honor to be able to talk to you and those who want to listen today. And hopefully God will use it in a powerful way.
Amen. So I ended up with 3 books coming my way, all in the matter of a couple days. So your book, done with that. And then a book by Steve Poe, who's one of the other guys there. So Steve is now retired, stepped down from the church in Indianapolis. He wrote a book called Creatures of Habit, Breaking the Habits That Are Holding You Back from God's Best. And then this book by Drew Dick, Your Future Self Will Thank You, Secrets to Self-Control from the Bible and Brain Science. And I was a little surprised that, they're all sort of stacked on my desk, and I looked at them and I thought, these are 3 books that are saying the same thing. These are 3 books coming at the same issue, and that is, we could call it theologically, we could call it sanctification, we could call it getting better, we could call it spiritual maturity, we could call it self-help books, we could call it all kinds of different things. But I sort of wondered if they were a sign from God that I needed to raise my game. So I'm not going to ask you whether you think that's true. I'm going to ask you my first question of authors, and that is, what's your book about?
Well, really, first of all, it is a sign for you, Mike.
Yeah.
No, I
my
don't
wife,
know.
my children, they engaged you to say, would you talk with the guy? Yeah.
Yeah. Writing for me is deeply personal. I never write anything unless I'm really speaking out of a personal experience, a personal struggle that I'm wrestling with. This book, like my other two, just grew out of a deep tension going on inside of me, a deep stirring, and I believe that was God's Spirit just hounding me, if I can put it that way, speaking to me, nudging me, keeping me awake at night. A book really doesn't emerge out of me unless I just feel absolutely dragged into it, compelled to write it. And if I don't, it's just an act of disobedience. So this particular book, Done With That, Escape the Struggle of Your Old Life, does get into, habits. I guess I never really thought of it that way. And I was unaware of the other two books that you mentioned. Of course, the one has just been written, so that wasn't out when I was writing. But a book for me is deeply personal. It's something I'm wrestling with in my own life, and I see other people wrestling with. I would never write a book just to be in print. That's just not who I am. And so this came from a deep place in my life. Have you ever said, I just want to be done with that? And I've said that so many times about a particular habit or problem that I'm dealing with in my own life. Why can't I get over that? Or why does this continue to surface as a nagging problem in my life? And so that's really where the title came, Done With That. I want to be done with certain things, get over them, get past them, so that I can live a better life.
So I know that some people are going to be surprised because you're a pastor of one of the 10 largest churches in the country at the time. So there will be people who think, in spite of whatever we say, that our lives work better than they do, that we're over that we don't have these struggles or temptations or trials or challenges in our marriage or heartache or doubt or whatever. So I know that there are people out there that are surprised. Were you surprised? Like, do you look at your life and say, wow, if you had told me 25 years ago that I'd be pastoring this church and yet I'd still be stuck, if I can use that word, I'll still have these, your term, signature sin. I still have these habits, my life is much more Romans 7 than I expected it to be. Than it is 2 Corinthians, 5. There's a new creation and I am, all things are new and the old man is gone. So does it surprise you that you still have these struggles?
Yeah, I mean, I'm 65 now. I think when I was 25, I didn't know anything, but I thought I knew everything. When you're young, you just don't have an awareness that you should. You're just kind of driving hard and using raw talent, raw ability, hopefully being led by God's Spirit if you're a Christian. But as a young person, I was so unaware of even my abilities as we're, trying to figure out who we are in life. You're just not aware. And at this age, having much of my life behind me, or 2/3 of it or 3/4 of it behind me, you would think at 65, you'd have it all nailed down, or at 60 or 55, whatever age you might be. But as you get older, Mike, you realize you're not a perfect person. And as you try to overcome some of these flaws, character issues, flat out sin, and they keep repeating themselves, you realize you're not perfect. You're far from perfect. And we will never be perfect on this side of heaven, even though, like the Bible says in 2 Corinthians 5:17, the old life is gone, the new has come. And that's the verse really that I stumbled on. How can this be true? What does it mean that the old life is gone and a new life has come? Because my old life is still there. I still struggle with my old life. So what does that verse mean to me? And I would hear pastors or teachers talk on that verse and I'd feel so defeated, because it seemed like if I'm struggling with sin, still something is deeply wrong with me. Well, yes, it is. I still have a sinful human nature. And so if you go through life and conclude that you're perfect, or that you really don't struggle with sin or temptation or destructive tendencies, two things: you're either in denial or you're completely unaware. And I frankly had both of these things going on in my life. But as I got older, I began to understand I'm simply unaware of how deeply flawed I am, even as a pastor who's taught on this kind of stuff.
Yeah. So let me ask this. So you write in your book, I mean, I'm not sharing anything that you don't share. You got lots of stories about yourself and your challenges and your struggles. And I want to go to that in a second, but your sort of signature sin was anger, and you say that's the outer edge of the onion and you had to peel it back. But let me ask this. If somebody saw you at 65, would they say, Bob, you're better, you're just more aware of the areas where you're not better? So, because you've got that quote by C.S. Lewis in there. I mean, it's a quote I've resonated with out of Mere Christianity, where he says, a bad person doesn't know how bad they are. A good person starts to realize how bad they are because they've tried to be better and they go, wow, I can't. And so to some extent, is this like, would you look at your life and say, I have seen growth in my life, but I'm more aware of my desperate need for the grace of God because I realize how much more broken I was than I ever realized when I was 25?
You said that very well. If there wasn't growth, this is all a hopeless, desperate attempt, to either get better, improve, or see spiritual growth, or increase joy and happiness, peace, those kinds of things. So the good news is there is spiritual growth. There just isn't spiritual perfection. And I think the person who is a person of character and strength comes to a place in life where they are willing to admit that. They're willing to admit, hey, I have issues, and I have tensions in my life, and I have flaws that are actually destructive to myself and to the people around me, my marriage, my spouse, my kids, my friends, colleagues at work, that if I don't overcome some of this, or if I don't experience some growth toward this newer life that the Bible speaks about, I'm just going to keep hurting myself, my marriage, my children, and those around me. So as you grow in awareness, you realize, oh, I still have some stuff.
Yeah.
The person who is unaware is unaware. And therefore, if you're unaware of some of the things that you struggle with, or are offensive to other people, or are getting in the way of career advancement, or whatever it might be, if you're unaware of those things, how can you even begin to overcome them, or attack them, or address them? So the person of strength, the person of character, has come to a place in life where they're humble enough and honest enough to look at some of these things in their life that are still there, that still bubble up and rise up as problems that get in the way of our relationships in our life.
So I've been here 23 years, 24 years, and if I was asked what sermon series I did that has gotten the most purchase, I continue to hear about, it might be a series I did called Blind Spots, where because I had this horrific revelation on the golf course when I'm playing golf with a foursome, and there's a guy that has got about a 2.5 minute routine he goes through before every shot, and it's just killing us.
Yeah.
And the marshal comes along and keeps telling us to hurry up. And this guy keeps yelling at us and telling us we got to pick up our pace. And I realized at some point, he doesn't understand what he's doing. And then I just think, oh my goodness, if it's possible to be that clueless about your own behavior, what does everybody around me know about me that I have not yet figured out? And it's just a horrible moment. So you talk in your book, by the way, you tell lots of stories, and I almost feel like you talk twice about laughing at your wife in the middle of a fight. I think like, wow, this needs to come with a do not do this little warning on it. But you tell another story in which on 2 occasions, the elders came to you and said, you have to go into a process. You have to go to a program. You have to understand. And I think one of the times, if I'm remembering right, is like 200 pages of feedback that you get, and they lock you in a room and force you to read this. I mean,
can I leave this Zoom call and show you those documents? It takes me like 3 seconds.
Sure.
Let me just grab this real quick. So yes, I had to go to counseling for a full year. And this is these 2 books, 235 pages, 225 pages of feedback that was given to me after, a year-long knockdown, drag out, going down to this counselor, seeing him, being interviewed. He interviewed all my family members, all my friends, anybody who knew me. And this was after the church board. This was 10 years into my leading Eaglebrook. We were probably a church, I know we'd grown from 300 to 5,000 or whatever. And just, it was such a fast pace, Mike. I had no time, no margin to think about, do I have any character flaws? I don't think I do. Here's part of the difficulty I was having is that outwardly we were experiencing all this success, if you can call it that. Church was growing, people were coming, and as pastors, we get a lot of compliments and along with a lot of criticism, but outwardly we were successful. And so part of my rationale or part of my psyche was, if this is going so well outwardly, I must have it together. I must be a good leader, a person people can trust and follow. By the way, one of my spiritual gifts is teaching. I'm an accomplished teacher. How can anybody really criticize me for anything because of the success? And what a blind spot. You talk about blind spots. I mean, how many people who are quote unquote successful do we know who are absolute train wrecks in their personal life? I mean, you can talk about sports figures. Tiger Woods lost his marriage, his kids. Tom Brady just tanked his career and his personal life, not his career necessarily, but here he's having the worst year in football, lost his marriage, lost his kids, incredibly talented, one of the best, the GOAT they call him. And yet he's got something behind all of that in his character that caused him to lose his entire personal life. Now, that's kind of what was going on with me. How can I be criticized? How can I have something dreadfully wrong with me, given all this success? And so that's when the church board stepped in and say, time out, Bob. Yeah, all this is happening. All this looks great, but there are some deep cracks in your character that if you don't address them, we're going to fire you. And I'll never forget that board meeting, Mike. You've been in some of these board meetings late at night. My jaw dropped to the table. And I thought, these 8 people in this room have the power to fire me. And they said, we will let you continue to lead under one condition, that you go away and you get counseling for a full year. And I said, okay. And I did. And that was the first time in my life, I think I was 42 years old, that I had the privilege or the opportunity to have a professional dig into my life and surface some of these issues that were happening that really threatened my career, threatened my marriage. My marriage was suffering. I was unaware of that. My kids were suffering. I was unaware of that. My friends or colleagues at work were afraid of me. And I was, again, running so fast and had such deep unawareness of what it was that was causing this. I just kind of blew it off.
So you obviously you were coming at this in a little bit of a different camp. So you are at in one category, you are one of the most quote unquote successful pastors. Now, I think we would both challenge that term. Bigger doesn't necessarily mean better, doesn't mean successful. There's a lot of issues there, but you're seeing professional growth. What you're going after, you're seeing happen, but it's coming at a great personal cost, and you're not aware of the fallout, the carnage behind you. So,
well, Mike, let me say this. I was suffering just from a manic pace of life. I was teaching at Bethel Seminary. I was leading their department, trying to lead this massive church, trying to attend to 125 staff who many of them were, having their own personal. So I was trying to manage this enormous demand on my life, and it was humanly impossible. But I didn't know when to throw up the white flag and say, "Hey, I need help."
So I want to footnote that, but I also want to say how many other people, they're working in business, they're a doctor, they're a teacher, they're whatever they're doing. They may not have the Christian celebrity status or whatever we would say you're enjoying at that point, but they are stuck in a different way but don't know it, or they know it. How many people do you think actually grow and are moving a little bit away from the Romans? Or do we just say Romans 7 is normal? Paul is frustrated with his own lack of growth. We just need to normalize this more. How would you put numbers to that?
Well, not everybody grows. We know full-grown adults who are still stuck in their old patterns, hopelessly stuck. And there's reasons for that. I would say, first of all, for me, it was so painful. I was experiencing such pain through this counseling and being confronted with this, and pain through broken relationships. And, one of the persons who was interviewed for, what's it like to be Bob's son, he was 15 years old, and he said, I don't understand why my dad is so mad all the time. And I was totally, so when the counselor read that back to me, it crushed me. So this painful, this feedback of people saying, Bob's not loving. Bob is harsh with his language. It's not fun to be around Bob. I don't know how much longer I can last on staff because of his leadership. When I was read back those statements, 225 pages of it crushed me. And so the turning point for me, Mike, in spiritual growth was pain. And I needed to experience a level of pain and even fear of losing my job. That's the only thing that got my attention, that said, okay, something's wrong. I was in such pain that I knew something had to change. And so a couple of things I'd say: you got to be honest about that. You got to be humble enough to look at it, and you got to do the hard work if you want to change, if you want to see spiritual growth. But so many people are unwilling to be honest about it. They're unwilling to be humble enough, and they simply don't have the courage or the the willingness to put in the work to overcome, whether it's an addiction or alcoholism or anger or deep anxiety or depression, whatever it might be. If you're unwilling to be honest about that and say something's wrong here, and then, okay, am I humble enough to go try to get some help and ask about that, get a counselor, get some help with that, and then am I willing to do what the counselor says?
Yeah. So I mean, we certainly could name a half dozen or maybe 3 dozen pastors who were in your situation and did not survive, did not have boards that were strong enough to stand up to them and say, you got to do this or else. And so God bless the board. One of the things that I've been frustrated with and written about in the last couple of years is we need boards that are real boards, elder boards, boards of trustees that are, you're doing the work. I mean, if you, because I've given money to organizations based on the fact that you look at the board and you go, okay, these are people that I know and trust, and they're looking under the hood, and in many cases they're not. So you had that opportunity. What do you say? I mean, most people are not going to they're not going to have the opportunity to get a 200-page report on their life. So
yeah, but okay, go ahead.
So how do people learn this about themselves?
It doesn't have to be a year-long big knockdown drag out with a professional counselor or coach, but I would ask a few questions. So if you're experiencing pain, or if you've been married twice now and you're looking at a 3rd divorce, or if you continually struggle with an addiction of some sort, if you continually find yourself lacking money or being marketable as an employee, will you be willing to read a couple of books if I recommend them to you? Would you be willing to come to church or seek some spiritual guidance and just see if God has something would you be willing to read, the book of James in the Bible, 5 chapters, easy read, and continue to read it over and over again until it seeps into your soul? Or the book of Proverbs, would you be willing to do that? Would you be willing to talk to a counselor? You and I, Mike, we pull our hair out sometimes, and we counsel somebody who's struggling in their marriage, and we say, well, have you ever been to counseling? They say, well, no. Are you in a small group? No. Do you read your Bible? No. Do you have you read any good book on? No. And it's like, I don't even know what to say to that. I don't know what to do with that. And then they'll criticize you for a 30-minute sermon that didn't meet their needs on the weekend. Mm-hmm. It's almost unfair. You can't come to a church service and expect a 30-minute message or sermon, whatever you want to call it, to fix you if you've neglected all week long your soul. And your soul is starving, and so now they're expecting. So that's a bit of a tangent there. Some baggage that's coming out of me.
Right. Well, I have been fortunate. 25 years ago, I got with a couple guys, and we have done this every year or so. And we've now moved, a couple times, probably 4 or 5 moves among us. So we're no longer in the same zip code, but talk frequently, a couple times a week. And then also get together for some extended times. And we've done 2 things, and I'll put these in my, I guess I'm supposed to say the show notes, but I'll put these somewhere that people can access. And one is just a set of questions that we fill out about our life and sort of self-reporting. And it's a safe environment. It's these people they only want what's best for you. So there's no advantage to hiding anything. And we sort of do a deep dive in each other's lives. But the other thing is we do something called 2+1, where we share 2 affirmations and a challenge. So I want to affirm you in this, I want to challenge you in this, and I want to affirm you in this. And it is, now, of course, we do 2 affirmations and a challenge, but the only thing you hear is the challenge. Like, oh my goodness, exactly. This is a kick in the gut.
Yeah.
And but it's sort of a safeguard. And I tell you what, it's not fun. I mean, it's
No.
remarkably unfun. And you can get mad when people, especially when they're both saying the same thing. Like, here's your blind spot, dude. And then you're like, this is what you said last year. You know, I'm sick of you saying, you know, move on to something else. And it's like, no, because this is it. But you gotta seek out people that you can trust that will tell you these things. Otherwise, the only person that will tell you the truth is your spouse, and that's usually not well received, and it causes all kinds of tension. And I try to say to especially men, look, the more professional success you have, the less likely you know the truth about yourself, because people aren't going to tell you because you got power over them or they want something from you. And so you're going to have to work really hard to hear that. Or you're going to have a board that just says, oh, you know what? Here's your choices. You can be fired or you can go to counseling.
Yeah.
We may not have that gift that you had, so we may have to just aggressively seek it out on our own.
Yeah, I mean, the truth is we can only see 40%, or we can't see 40% of our body. For example, I can't see the back of my head. And I cut my own hair now with a buzz thing, and I actually had a mohawk back here and didn't realize it speaking on stage, because I can't see the back, I can't see my backside. And that's really true about our personality or our character. We can't see 40% of who we are. And so I'll bet you and I, Mike, whoever our friends are, family, you and I could point out a flaw or an issue that this person probably needs to work on, maybe unaware of. That's the same with us.
Yeah.
Anybody who knows me could point out a flaw or two, not to hurt me, if they have
Right.
the best interest, not to bring me down, but to be aware of it so that I'm not offending people right and left, not hurting relationships, not hurting job promotion, not hurting friendships. It's just, you're doing yourself a huge favor if you have the courage to look at that 40%.
You talk in your book, I think I noted this on page 31, you talk about the cost of not following Christ. Or you say the cost of following Christ, the cost of being a disciple, the cost of doing the things that you've got to do can be high. It's okay, you're going to have to die to self, you're going to have to do these things. But then you talk about the cost of not doing those things and the tremendous bondage of bad habits and sin and brokenness. So I think we've established that those points that you were stuck, we're all stuck, we've got blind spots. So you saw growth, you've been a pastor. How does growth happen? You said you've got to come at this with humility and you got to be resigned to hard work. What is, but then what? Okay, maybe I'm stuck, or I know I'm stuck. I'm addicted. I've got problems. I can't get out of my own way. I see it now. So what do I do?
Well, you mentioned Paul's writing in Romans 7, and he says there, I see the thing that I want to do and I can't do it. I want to do what's right. I can't do it. I keep falling back into this sinful pattern. And then he concludes all that almost in exhaustion and says, thank be to God, for Jesus Christ. Basically, it's like I'm hopeless in this area that I'm struggling with, but thank goodness Christ lives in me, and his spirit actually lives inside. The same spirit who raised Jesus from the dead lives inside every believer. And so that's really where it starts and where it continues and where it'll be finished. It's God's ongoing work by his spirit. Mike, you and me are sinners. And so for me, it's a daily, I've got my place where I sit every morning. It's a chair. My Bible is there. I have a good book I'm reading. It's the place that's designated for me to meet with God. And I quiet my life, and there's confession. God, forgive me for sin. Reveal to me as I sit here with you. If there's anything in my life right now that needs to be addressed, please reveal that to me. But it's a quiet time in the morning with my coffee, 30 minutes now, 40, 45 minutes these days. It used to be shorter than that when I was working like a crazy man. But it's a spiritual thing. I need God's spirit. I need his power to reveal things to me, to nudge me in areas of need. And then just saying, God, will you help me overcome this? Forgive me for stumbling over it yesterday or 2 days ago. Please make me new, make me clean. Give me your power. Give me your grace and your wisdom to overcome that. So it's really a spiritual battle. It's also, and I'll use that word battle, Satan is attacking us. Satan is a real being, and the Bible says that he is trying to bring us down every single day. And so I pray against Satan's attack, putting up the shield of faith, which just extinguishes all the flaming arrows of the evil one. So the evil one is trying to shoot at us and cause us to stumble and trip. So I come against him. It's a spiritual battle. And I'm never going to be perfect. It is going to be a fight. It's going to be a fight. And these things rise up in me, and I have to go back to God's spirit and say, forgive me. I failed. I let my mouth run off. I was critical of my spouse. I was angry. I was overly judgmental of someone. I said something I shouldn't have to a friend. Please forgive me of that. So I'm never going to be perfect on this side of heaven, because I still have a sinful nature. Yep. But because God's spirit is inside of me, there is a power to overcome those things, not to perfection, but hopefully over time, there's a spiritual growth that takes place, and I'm stronger today than I was yesterday.
You said there's a couple of things you said that I want to pivot back to. So first of all, I want to emphasize something that we are more aware. I certainly am more aware of my desperate need for grace than I was 25 years ago. So if you had asked me 25 years ago, when I'm first sort of waking up to the fact that, well, I don't just need a coach, I don't just need good advice. I'm actually going to need help with this sin that it is a little surprising to me. Like, wow, I can't just get better. And so let's just say I needed, at that point, I said, well, the difference between my performance and God's standard is I need a pound of grace. We'll say it's a pound of grace. So now, fast forward 30 years, I now say, okay, I now see the difference between where God is and where I am, as I need like 5,000 pounds of grace. And it's, in some ways, I'm better than I was. My actions, my heart, I've gotten wiser. I'm more compassionate. But what's really changed is I understand how deeply broken I am behind that. I can put on a better face than I used to. Mm-hmm. So I realize I'm far more layered in brokenness. But I also see that God's holiness is so much bigger than I understood. So I need so much more grace. And I think most people showing up at church consistently would understand that we are saved by grace through faith, that it is a gift of God. We are not going to be able to earn. We need Jesus as our Savior. So salvation is by grace through faith, not of ourselves. It's a gift. We don't contribute 1% in that equation. I think we get that. I think that I had not appreciated until, 5 years ago, 10 years ago, how much grace I needed in the sanctification process. I would have thought, some of this I just got to muscle through. I just have to keep I got to try harder. I got to do more. And there's a partnership there. I think Augustine said, we can't do it and God won't do it without us. We can't get better on our own, and God's not going to make us better unless we show up with certain availability and submit ourselves to other people and to confession and to the Bible and to service, that those things will make us better. So I appreciate in your book and what you're saying that, yeah, spiritual growth is about our own efforts. We've got to adopt some of these practices. We got to submit ourselves to certain patterns, but it's also, we're desperately dependent upon the grace of God.
Absolutely.
And that doesn't go away. We now realize I need more grace than I thought I did yesterday.
Absolutely. Yeah. I mean, you're touching on something, Mike, extremely helpful to me, even right now as I'm listening to you. And I started to talk about it a little bit, where I have a chair and so that there are certain things that I have to do to put myself in a position of spiritual growth. We're not just a body, we're a body and a soul. And there are certain things I do to keep my body strong. I try to eat well. I'm drinking now 72 ounces of water every day because I just had a kidney stone. I don't want to go through that again. So I'm on that regimen. There are certain things I do for my body to keep my body strong. I work out, I'm fit, try to stay fit. But we also have a soul. And so what are some of the things I'm doing to make sure that my soul is fit or in a position where it can grow and thrive? So, having that daily time or consistent time where you're quiet before God, asking him to speak to you, reading some good literature, reading his Bible a little bit. Doesn't have to be long, just a few verses, sometimes at a time, and just prayerfully sitting there with him. But there's other things, who are the people you're hanging around with? Are they ahead of you in the spiritual realm? Are they people that can, bring wisdom into your life and hold you accountable? Are you reading some books that are helpful, or is it just entertainment? What are some of the things we talked about this too? It's, what are you feeding your mind? And if it's just all popular television or whatever it might be, and it's not offset by some other, purifying influence, you just have, there are certain disciplines, there are certain things I need to do so that my soul will thrive. There are certain things I need to avoid. I need to avoid certain video or certain movie content. I need to avoid certain types of literature or books or social media. I need to avoid certain kinds of people, perhaps, that would actually damage my soul. So I have to be careful that I don't think of myself as just a body. I also have a soul. And if I don't take care of my soul, there's no way I'm going to be able to overcome. God's spirit is going to be blocked. The Bible says you stifle the God's spirit through unconfessed sin, that God's spirit will be doused. So I don't want that to happen. I need to put my soul in a position where God's spirit can actually help me grow.
So you have a chapter called the middle is miserable.
Yeah.
Talk a little bit about what you mean by that.
Well, most people, if you talk to them, especially people who are coming to our church, will say, I want to be a Christian. I want enough of God to get me into heaven and be good with God and have a decent life. But I want to have a little fun too. So, I want to indulge in some certain things. I want to have enough of God to make me good with him, and I'm good with heaven. But man, I want to have fun. I want to sin a little bit. And that's a formula for absolute frustration, because people often say what happens in Vegas stays in Vegas. That is such a lie, because whatever happens in Vegas follows you home in the form of regret, probably a diminishment of your finances, probably relational brokenness if you're married or have some people in your life you care about. I mean, what stays in Vegas or what happens in Vegas does not stay in Vegas. It follows you all the way home. And so, you know, to try to walk that middle line of God and sin, what's going to happen is sin will always pull you in that direction.
Yeah.
And you'll be the most frustrated, defeated, live with ongoing regret, live with relational failure if you try to walk this middle. It doesn't mean that if I'm going to be, you know, this godly person that God's going to extract all the fun out of my life. But I would rather be a person who hunts deer and pheasants, who I love with my dog, and come home to a spouse who knows that she could trust me on my trip. I'd rather, you know, I can golf and still not sin like crazy. I can still enjoy my round of golf without sinning, you know, with the cocktail waitress afterwards or with the guys and whatever the guys do. I can still enjoy golf and still not end up in the ditch.
Yep.
And I think that's what God would.
You know, I think two things there when I was reading your chapter that I thought of. One is that, first of all, I think there's this idea that being holy or the Puritans, I mean, all this is no fun. It's like miserly, small, ugly. When in actuality, it's sin that is not fun. Sin is broken good. It can never deliver. It's got a great advertising campaign going, but in the end, it's diminished. And addiction, I think, it shows that it shows where this goes. It takes more and more, it gives less and less until pretty soon you're miserable, you're getting no upside, and it's taking everything. And so I think that somehow we got to challenge this idea that loving God or being that somehow that kind of thriving or that life is without joy, when in actuality it would be more joyful. And the second thing that I thought of is Clayton Christensen, who passed away, was a Harvard Business School professor, wrote a book called How to Measure Your Life. And he talks about making a bunch of decisions. He was a Rhodes Scholar and a bunch of other things. And he talks about early on making a bunch of decisions that there were some things he was just always going to say no to. One of them, and he talks about this, was playing basketball on Sundays. And when he's a Rhodes Scholar, he's at Oxford, and they're supposed to play in the national championship game. It's just a chariots of fire thing. Supposed to play in this game, and the championship game is on a Sunday. And he just says, no, I'm not going to do it.
Right.
And of course, all kinds of arguments from everybody up and down the food chain about how this is horrible. And he said, look, my life is simple. There's just a bunch of things I've decided yes, and a bunch of things I've decided no, and I never have to think about them again. It's when you sort of waffle back and forth that your life gets complicated. And I do think, and again, you talk about this a little bit when you talk about the high cost of non-discipleship, the high cost of sin, the high cost of compromise on your values and other things. I think that we don't appreciate that.
Yeah. So I would, to follow Christ, have God in my life, Mike, and to grow in my relationship with him on a daily basis. You touched on it, brings such joy, such peace, not perfect peace. I don't think I'll ever have perfect peace on the side of heaven, but it increases the love in my life, the friendship factor, a security, a eternal security, but also just a security in this chaotic world that only God by his Spirit. I would much rather live that life than one that is chaotic, stuck in greed, lust, regret, failure, which is what a non-godly life brings you. And so it's not even a comparison. It's not that you have to get a new personality, become all godly and start talking Christianese. That's bogus. It's simply that I'm growing in this relationship with God who loves me and forgives me and wants to strengthen me to face this cruel old world that we live in, and wants to save me from all this brokenness and failure and regret.
Yep.
That
And hurting people that I love.
Yes.
Like, I'm so tired of hurting people that I love. I want to stop doing that. Okay, so we're just about done here. One other comment, I guess, one other observation that sort of been a discovery to me in the last 10 years. Maybe this is something on your radar, maybe not. I saw you had a Dallas Willard quote in there, and Dallas Willard was the one that alerted me to this initially, and then I just see it now much more in secular studies, and that is that our willpower is very weak. It's a very limited muscle. And we have to understand that, because we can't, lots of people talk about this in terms of January 1st. I said, I'm gonna lose 15 pounds. I'm gonna save all this money. I'm gonna read the Bible through in a year. We got 20 different things that we're gonna do. And the argument is, no, we just don't have that much sheer gumption. We just can't force ourselves. And using our willpower in any way deletes it in every other arena. And so the argument has been, and I've seen this resonate for me in different ways, almost accidentally, but the argument is we need good habits, because once you develop the habit, then it doesn't take any willpower anymore. And then you can move on to the next habit. And so for me, by just, dumb luck, God's grace, whatever, I developed the habit when I was in my late 20s of going to bed early and getting up early, because I just discovered, if I stay up late, the line I heard, nothing good happens after 11 o'clock.
Right.
But I don't get up at 5 a.m. to watch TV. I don't get up at 5 a.m. to do mindless, stupid stuff. If I'm up at 5 a.m, it's thoughtful time. And so I just started going to bed earlier and getting up earlier. And and now, having done it for 40, 35 years, whatever, it's easy. I mean, it doesn't take any energy for me to get up at 5 o'clock, because it's just as a matter of fact, it's really hard not to get up at 5 o'clock. So on vacation, I'd sort of like to go, I'd sort of like to sleep in, but I can't.
So let's talk just briefly about sexual temptation. As pastors, people, doesn't matter. Men particularly are drawn to women, and visually. And so as a younger pastor, in travel is really a danger point, because you're alone, you're unknown. And so if I was in an airport, I knew that the bookstore was a danger spot. So I would literally walk on the other side of the corridor when I saw a bookstore. I refused to allow myself to go into the bookstore, because back in the day, we knew where the pornography was. We knew where Playboy and Hustler and all that was. And I did not want, Mike, here's the thing. My emotional want to can override my willpower. So if I'm in the bookstore, there's an emotional want to that is dangerous to me. And I knew as a young person that I didn't have the willpower or strength to overcome that. So I literally had to walk on the other side of the corridor to avoid any sort of pull toward that place where the magazines were. I just don't trust myself.
Yeah.
And so all through life, I've had to put up boundaries. And you and I both know of, godly people, pastors, who have failed in this area, and we scratch our heads and we say, how did that happen to so-and-so? It would never happen to me. Oh, really?
Yeah. Yeah.
So
That's
I'm
almost,
just saying, there's, our willpower, I have to avoid, literally physically avoid certain temptations so that I'm not, overpowered by my emotion. Does that make sense? I have to stay
I think
away
it
from
makes great sense. And again, I think there's two sides of this. One is to recognize that our will is weak. It's
Yeah.
it's a limited muscle, and it's gonna tap out pretty quickly. So consequently, what we need is good habits. We need good friends. We need safeguards. We need that in order to grow. Yep.
Yep.
So we're coming up on an hour, and you've been gracious to give me that time. Are you gonna write another book?
Well, I haven't had that staying
That
awake at
urge.
night, that fire. No, but I've been asked that, and I may, but we'll see.
Are you reading anything right now that you're recommending to other people?
Yeah, I'm reading a few things. I just read the Andre Agassi story called Open. What a fantastic autobiography, Against All Odds by Alex Kershaw's World War II. So I'm reading a little bit of that. Here's a book that I've read recently called The Earned Life by Marshall Goldsmith. I hesitate a little bit because he follows Buddhism, but he's this world-class consultant and talks about some of the things we've talked about. So I've overlooked the Buddhist part of it and just tried to glean some things that are important for everybody. So anyway, those are some things I've been reading a little bit.
Okay. Well, I appreciated your book, and I appreciated the time that you gave.
Hey, Mike, as you're concluding here, this is the third book. I've written two others. The other two books, if you don't mind, were Get Wise, which is, I think, just a must read for every parent, young person. Talk about the basics of living based on the book of Proverbs.
Yep.
Yeah, and then my first book, When Life's Not Working, and it was retitled, I have to look at it, 7 Simple Choices for a Better Tomorrow. It's been a while.
7 simple what?
7 Simple Choices for a Better Tomorrow.
Okay.
And that was my first book, but yeah.
So the second book, called Get Wise, is on Proverbs.
Yeah, based on Proverbs, and just really gritty, everyday, again, story filled with personal stuff and failures and flops. So yeah.
Well, yeah, I should say to the listeners that your book, done with that, there's lots of stories. So it is a
fun read.
It is got some heavy lifting, but there's a lot of stories in there to sort of carry you through, and some of which I've winced a couple of times. Again, when you were laughing at your wife, I'm like, oh man, I'm like, dude, that is such a bad strategy. She's gonna whatever.
Well, like I said, I'm a flawed human being, Mike. Still working on it.
Okay. Well, I appreciate this time. Enjoy the rest of the day. It's a glorious day in Chicago. It's supposed to get almost 70 degrees today.
Yeah.
And so I don't know when you next roused blue out to go peasant hunting or elk hunting or whatever it is that you're going to do, fishing. But appreciate the time that you gave us this morning, and I look forward to staying in touch.
Thanks, Mike.